The ice cracked beneath Eliza Crawford's boots like a gunshot echoing across the frozen lake. And in that single heartbeat before the world gave way, she knew she was going to die. The frigid water of Lake Lamoille swallowed her whole, stealing her breath and dragging her down into darkness so complete she couldn't tell which way was up. Her lungs screamed for air as the weight of her wool skirts pulled her deeper, the layers of fabric that were meant to keep her warm in the brutal Nevada winter of 1885 now becoming her death shroud. She thrashed against the water, her fingers clawing uselessly at the smooth underside of the ice above her head. And when she finally found her voice, the scream that tore from her throat was muffled by the frozen barrier between her and the world of the living. Harrison Tucker had been tracking the wounded elk for 3 hours, following the blood trail through the snow-covered wilderness north of Carlin, when he heard something that made his blood run colder than the December air around him. A woman's scream, distant but unmistakable, came from the direction of the lake. He didn't hesitate. Years of living in the untamed frontier had taught him that hesitation meant death, and the terror in that sound spoke of seconds, not minutes. He dug his heels into his horse's flanks and urged the buckskin gelding forward through the deep snow, his rifle bouncing against his back as the horse lunged through the drifts. The lake came into view through the pines, and Harrison's keen eyes immediately found the jagged hole in the ice about 30 yards from the shore. He could see movement beneath the surface, pale hands pressing against the frozen ceiling of her prison. Without thinking, he threw himself from his horse and ran toward the lake, his boots pounding against the snow-covered bank. The ice groaned under his weight as he stepped onto it, spreading his arms wide to distribute his body mass. Every instinct told him to move fast, but he forced himself to slide his feet rather than step, knowing that if he broke through too far from shore they would both die in these freezing waters. "Hold on," he shouted, though he didn't know if she could hear him. "I'm coming." The ice protested with sharp cracks that sounded like rifle fire, but Harrison kept moving, lowering himself to his belly to spread his weight even more. He could see her clearly now through the ice, her dark hair floating around her face like seaweed, her eyes wide with panic. Her movements were growing weaker. He had maybe a minute before the cold water claimed her completely. When he was within 10 feet of the hole, Harrison pulled the lariat from his belt and tied one end around his waist with fingers that shook from adrenaline rather than cold. He wrapped the other end around his forearm and then used his elbow to smash through the thinning ice near the hole, widening the opening. The freezing water splashed across his face and chest, and the shock of it nearly stopped his heart. This water was cold enough to kill in minutes. He plunged his arm down into the hole and felt fabric, then skin, then he had her wrist in an iron grip. Harrison pulled with every ounce of strength in his body, hauling her up through the water and ice. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, choking and coughing, water streaming from her nose and mouth. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as death, but her eyes found his, and in them he saw a fierce will to live that matched his own determination to save her. "I've got you," he said through gritted teeth, pulling her up onto the ice beside him. "We need to move now. This ice won't hold much longer." She couldn't speak, her teeth chattering so violently he could hear them clicking together, but she nodded. Harrison kept his grip on her wrist and began sliding backward toward the shore, pulling her with him. The ice groaned and cracked beneath them, and twice more it gave way, plunging them both into water up to their waists before they could scramble onto more solid sections. By the time they reached the snowy bank, Harrison's legs were numb and Eliza was barely conscious. He didn't waste time with words. He scooped her into his arms and carried her to where his horse waited, then threw her across the saddle and climbed up behind her. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his own wet clothes, and he knew they had maybe 10 minutes before the cold killed her anyway. His cabin was a mile north, but the Crawford Ranch was closer, just beyond the ridge to the east. He turned his horse toward the ranch, holding Eliza against his chest and using his own body to block the wind. The ride to the Crawford Ranch took less than 15 minutes but felt like hours. Eliza had stopped shaking, which Harrison knew was a bad sign. The body stopped shivering when it no longer had the energy to generate heat. He could feel her heart beating against his arm, but it was slow and irregular. When the ranch house finally came into view, he was shouting before they even reached the yard. "Help! Someone help! She's freezing to death!" The door burst open, and a middle-aged man with silver streaking his dark hair came running out, his face going white when he saw the woman draped across Harrison's saddle. "Eliza! Dear God, what happened?" The man reached up to take his daughter from Harrison's arms. "She broke through the ice on Lake Lamoille," Harrison said, sliding down from his horse. His own legs nearly gave out when his feet hit the ground. "We need to get her warm now, or she won't make it." Inside the house, a woman who Harrison assumed was Eliza's mother was already building up the fire and heating water. They carried Eliza into a bedroom, and Mrs. Crawford shooed both men out while she stripped her daughter's wet clothes and wrapped her in dry blankets. Harrison stood in the main room, dripping water onto the wooden floor, his own body starting to shake as the adrenaline wore off, and his own cold-soaked condition made itself known. Mr. Crawford appeared with a bundle of dry clothes. "These belonged to my son before he headed to California. Get out of those wet things before you catch your death. I owe you my daughter's life, young man." "Harrison Tucker," he said, taking the clothes with hands that trembled. "I was hunting north of the lake when I heard her scream. Marcus Crawford, get changed, then come sit by the fire. My wife is making coffee." Harrison changed in the small washroom, peeling off his frozen clothes and pulling on the soft flannel shirt and wool pants Marcus had provided. They were slightly too short in the legs but wonderfully dry. When he emerged, Mrs. Crawford was just coming out of Eliza's bedroom, her face drawn but no longer panicked. "She's warming up," she said, relief thick in her voice. "Her color is coming back and she stopped that terrible shaking. I think she's going to be all right thanks to you. Can she talk?" Harrison asked, surprised by how much he wanted to see those fierce eyes open again to hear her voice. "Not yet. She's sleeping now, which is probably for the best. Her body needs to recover." Mrs. Crawford pressed a cup of hot coffee into his hands. "You saved my daughter's life, Mr. Tucker. I don't know how we can ever repay you." "No repayment needed, madam. I just did what anyone would do." Marcus snorted from his chair by the fire. "Not anyone would have the courage to go out on that ice. It's been an early winter and a cold one. That lake isn't fully frozen yet, which makes it dangerous as a rattlesnake. What was Eliza doing out there?" "Taking the shortcut back from town, I imagine," Mrs. Crawford said with a sigh. "I've told her 100 times not to cross the lake this time of year, but our Eliza has always been headstrong. She went into Carlin this morning to pick up supplies from the general store." Harrison sipped his coffee and felt warmth slowly seeping back into his body. The Crawford home was comfortable and well-maintained, with handmade quilts draped over the furniture and the smell of bread baking in the kitchen. These were good people, working people who had carved out a life in this harsh territory through determination and hard work. "Where are you from, Mr. Tucker?" Marcus asked. "Call me Harrison, please. I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here, up in the hills. I do some trapping, some hunting, guide parties through the Ruby Mountains when the weather's good." "You live alone up there?" "Yes, sir." Been on my own since I was 18, and that was 7 years ago now. My parents died of fever down in Carson City, and I decided I preferred the wild country to city life. They talked for another hour, and Harrison learned that the Crawfords had been ranching in Nevada for 12 years, that they raised cattle and horses, that their son Thomas had left 2 years ago seeking gold in California, and that Eliza, at 23, was their youngest and had refused several marriage proposals because she claimed none of the local men could keep up with her. Mrs. Crawford said this with both pride and exasperation, and Harrison found himself smiling. "She's always been independent," Marcus said. "Gets it from her mother. Teaches at the schoolhouse in Carlin 3 days a week. Reads every book she can get her hands on, and can ride better than most men I know. She's also stubborn as a mule, which I suppose served her well today. A lesser person would have given up in that water." A soft sound came from the bedroom, and Mrs. Crawford hurried to check on her daughter. She returned a moment later with a cautious smile. "She's awake and asking about the man who pulled her from the lake." Harrison's heart did something strange in his chest, a quick double beat that had nothing to do with his recent brush with hypothermia. He stood, running a hand through his dark hair, suddenly aware that he must look like something the cat dragged in. "May I see her, just for a moment?" "She needs rest." The bedroom was warm and dim, lit only by a small lamp on the bedside table. Eliza was propped up on pillows, wrapped in what looked like every quilt the family owned. Her dark hair was dry now and fell in waves around her face, and her eyes, which he had first seen wide with terror beneath the ice, were a striking shade of green that seemed to glow in the lamplight. She looked at him with an intensity that made him feel like she could see straight through to his bones. "You're the cowboy who broke through the ice," she said, and her voice was hoarse but steady. "They told me you heard me screaming. I did. I'm just glad I was close enough to reach you in time. I thought I was going to die down there. I couldn't find the hole I'd fallen through. Everything was dark and cold, and I couldn't breathe." She paused, her hands gripping the edge of the quilt. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough for what you did." Harrison moved closer to the bed, drawn by something he couldn't name. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you're all right. I'm Eliza Crawford, though I suppose you've figured that out by now. Harrison Tucker." "Harrison Tucker," she repeated, as if testing the weight of his name. "You're very brave, Harrison Tucker. That ice could have killed you too." "I didn't really think about it. I just heard you and I came." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No thoughts, just action." "That's either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe a bit of both," he admitted, and she laughed, a soft sound that ended in a cough. Mrs. Crawford appeared in the doorway. "That's enough for now. Eliza needs to rest, and so do you, Harrison. You're welcome to stay the night. We have a guest room, and you're in no condition to ride back to your cabin." Harrison wanted to protest, but the truth was he was exhausted. The cold water, the adrenaline, the fear, all of it had taken a toll on his body. "That's very kind of you, madam. I appreciate it." "It's the least we can do," Marcus said from behind his wife. "You saved our daughter's life. You'll always have a place at our table." As Mrs. Crawford shooed him toward the guest room, Harrison glanced back and found Eliza watching him, those green eyes thoughtful. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection forged in ice and terror and the fierce drive to survive. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he felt it settle into his chest like an ember waiting to catch flame. That night, Harrison lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the wind howl around the house and thinking about a dark-haired woman with eyes like spring grass, and a will strong enough to keep her alive in freezing water. He had saved her life, but he had the strangest feeling that she was going to change his in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day where the air hurt to breathe and the snow sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Harrison woke to the smell of bacon and coffee, and when he emerged from the guest room, he found the whole Crawford family gathered around the breakfast table, including Eliza, who was wrapped in a thick shawl and looked pale but determined. "You should be in bed," Harrison said before he could stop himself. "Good morning to you too," Eliza replied with a raised eyebrow. "I'm fine. Just cold yesterday, that's all. You nearly drowned and froze to death. That's more than just cold." "Are you always this bossy with women you've just met? Only when they're being stubborn about nearly dying?" Marcus coughed to hide a laugh, and Mrs. Crawford busied herself serving pancakes. Eliza's eyes flashed with annoyance and something else, something that might have been amusement. "Sit down, Harrison," she said. "Have some breakfast before you ride back to your cabin, and stop worrying about me. I'm tougher than I look." "I don't doubt that," Harrison said, taking a seat across from her. "Anyone else would have panicked and drowned in half the time it took me to reach you." Over breakfast, they talked about the weather, about the cattle Marcus was planning to sell in the spring, about the new family that had moved into Carlin last month. But Harrison found his attention constantly drawn to Eliza, to the way she gestured when she talked, to the intelligence in her eyes, to the set of her jaw that spoke of that stubbornness her father had mentioned. She caught him looking more than once, and each time she met his gaze with a directness that was both challenging and intriguing. After breakfast, Harrison prepared to leave, but Mrs. Crawford insisted on packing him food for the ride home. As he was loading the supplies into his saddlebags, Eliza appeared beside him, still wrapped in her shawl but moving with only a slight stiffness. "I wanted to thank you again," she said quietly. "Properly, without my mother hovering. What you did yesterday was extraordinary. You risked your life for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Harrison said, and realized as he said it that it was true. Something about pulling someone from the edge of death created a bond that went beyond normal acquaintance. "And I would do it again. I hope you never have to. I've learned my lesson about crossing that lake in winter." She paused, wrapping the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Will you come back? To visit, I mean. My parents would like to thank you properly, and I would like to get to know the man who saved my life." Harrison's heart did that strange double beat again. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." "Good. Come by next Sunday for dinner. My mother makes the best roast in the territory, and my father wants to talk to you about guiding some business associates through the mountains in the spring." "I'll be here," Harrison promised. He rode away from the Crawford ranch with a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the bright winter sun and everything to do with the woman watching him from the porch, her dark hair lifting in the cold wind, her green eyes following him until he disappeared over the ridge. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Harrison spent the week checking his trap lines, bringing in firewood for the winter, and thinking far too much about Eliza Crawford. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that they had barely spoken, that she was probably just being polite because he had saved her life. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face through the ice, that fierce determination to survive, and he felt again that spark of connection. When Sunday finally arrived, Harrison took extra care with his appearance, washing in the frigid water from his well and shaving carefully. He put on his best shirt, the dark blue one he usually saved for trips into town, and made sure his boots were clean. Then he saddled his horse and rode toward the Crawford ranch with his pulse beating faster than it had any right to. Eliza met him at the door, and Harrison's breath caught in his throat. She was wearing a deep green dress that matched her eyes, and her dark hair was pinned up in a way that showed off the graceful line of her neck. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "You came," she said. "I said I would." Some men say a lot of things they don't mean. I'm not some men. No, she agreed softly. I'm beginning to see that you're not. Dinner was everything Eliza had promised and more. The roast was tender and flavorful, the vegetables perfectly seasoned, and the conversation flowed as easily as the wine Marcus poured from a bottle he said he'd been saving for a special occasion. Harrison found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, laughing at Marcus's stories about the early days of the ranch, listening to Mrs. Crawford talk about her garden plans for spring, and most of all, talking with Eliza about everything from books to horses to the changing face of the frontier. "You've read Byron?" Eliza asked with surprise when Harrison mentioned the poet. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Carson City. She made sure I could read and appreciate literature before I was 10 years old." "And do you appreciate it?" "Some of it. I prefer Jack London's adventure stories to poetry, but I can see the beauty in well-crafted words. I teach the children in Carlin their letters and numbers," Eliza said, her face glowing with enthusiasm. "Watching them discover books for the first time is one of my greatest joys. Too many people out here think education doesn't matter, but I believe it's the key to building a better future." "I agree," Harrison said. "My mother believed the same thing. She used to say that an educated mind could survive anything because it could always find new solutions." "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. I miss her every day." After dinner, Eliza asked if Harrison would like to see the horses, and they walked out to the barn together while her parents cleaned up inside. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, and their breath made clouds in the cold air. In the barn, Eliza showed him her pride and joy, a bay mare named Copper with intelligent eyes and a coat that gleamed like a new penny. "She's beautiful," Harrison said, running a hand down the mare's neck. "Good conformation, strong legs. You trained her yourself, from a filly." "My father gave her to me on my 18th birthday. We've been partners ever since." Eliza leaned against the stall door, watching him with that intense gaze that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't experienced before. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever get lonely?" "Living up in those hills by yourself?" Harrison considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, but I've always been more comfortable with solitude than with crowds. Out here, I know what to expect. Animals, whether the land itself, they're all honest in their way. People can be complicated." "Complicated isn't always bad," Eliza said. "Sometimes complicated is interesting." "Is that what you are, complicated and interesting?" she laughed. "My mother says I'm difficult. My father says I'm particular. I prefer to think of myself as someone who knows what she wants and isn't willing to settle." "And what do you want?" Harrison asked, moving closer. Eliza was quiet for a moment, her green eyes searching his face. "I want a life that matters. I want to make a difference, even if it's just to a few children learning to read. I want someone who sees me as more than just a potential wife to cook and clean and bear children. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but I want to be seen as a whole person, not just a role to fill." "I see you," Harrison said quietly. "I saw you under that ice fighting to live. I saw you at breakfast yesterday, refusing to be treated like you were fragile. I see you now, passionate about the things you care about. I see all of that, Eliza." Her breath caught, and for a moment they just stood there in the dimly lit barn, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses and the smell of hay and leather. Then Eliza reached out and touched his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. "I'm glad you heard me screaming that day," she said. "Not just because you saved my life, but because I think I was meant to meet you." Is that foolish? If it is, then I'm a fool too because I feel the same way. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when Harrison left that night, it was with a promise to return the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and every Sunday for as long as the Crawfords would have him. Winter deepened its grip on the Nevada territory, but Harrison barely noticed the cold. Every Sunday he rode to the Crawford ranch, and every Sunday he fell a little more in love with Eliza Crawford. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared views on life and the world. She told him about her dreams of expanding the schoolhouse in Carlin, of bringing more books to the frontier, of making education available to everyone regardless of their means. He told her about his love of the wild places, about tracking animals through the mountains, about the peace he found in solitude, but also about the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long winter nights. On the fourth Sunday, Marcus pulled Harrison aside before he left. "My daughter is falling in love with you," he said bluntly, "and unless I miss my guess, you're falling for her too." Harrison didn't see any point in denying it. "Yes, sir, I care for her deeply. Eliza is special. She's turned down 3 proposals in the last 2 years because none of those men understood her. They saw a pretty face and a ranch that would one day be worth inheriting, but they didn't see the woman underneath. You see her and she sees you. That's rare." Marcus paused, his expression serious. "But you live in a cabin in the hills and my daughter teaches school in town. How do you see that working?" "I've been thinking about that," Harrison admitted. "I could move closer to Carlin, maybe build a house halfway between town and your ranch. I could still guide and hunt, but I'd be closer to civilization. If Eliza would have me, that is. Talk to her about it. And Harrison, you have my blessing for whatever that's worth. You saved my daughter's life, but more than that, you make her happy. I can see it in her eyes when she talks about you." Winter turned toward spring, and on a Sunday in early March, when the first signs of thaw were beginning to show, Harrison asked Eliza to walk with him along the creek that ran through the Crawford property. The ice was melting, creating a musical sound as the water rushed over rocks, and the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. "Eliza," Harrison said, stopping beside a large boulder where spring flowers were just beginning to push through the snow, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him with those green eyes that had haunted his dreams since the day he pulled her from the frozen lake. "You sound serious." "I am. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months, about my life, about what I want, about where I'm going." He took her hands in his, feeling them warm and alive. "I spent 7 years living alone in those hills, and I thought I was content. But then I heard you scream, and I pulled you from that ice, and everything changed. You changed everything, Eliza." "Harrison," she whispered, but he pressed on. "I love you. I love your stubbornness and your passion and your intelligence. I love the way you care about your students and the way you argue with me about books and the way you laugh when you think something is truly funny. I love all of you, and I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Tears sparkled in Eliza's eyes. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since you came out of that guest room and told me I should be in bed. No one talks to me like that, like they actually care about my well-being rather than just trying to control me. You see me, Harrison. You really see me. I do. And I want to keep seeing you every day for the rest of our lives." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a simple gold band with a small emerald that matched her eyes. "Eliza Crawford, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up longing of the past 3 months. She kissed him back with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just the two of them. Two people who had found each other against all odds in the vast wilderness of the Nevada frontier. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Carlin, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Crawford cried happy tears, and Marcus shook Harrison's hand with genuine warmth. Eliza wore a cream-colored dress that her mother had worn at her own wedding, altered to fit Eliza's slender frame, and Harrison wore a new suit that felt stiff and uncomfortable, but was worth it to see the look in Eliza's eyes when she walked down the aisle toward him. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, and Harrison thought about the frozen lake, about how close he had come to never knowing this woman, to never experiencing this love. When the preacher said he could kiss his bride, Harrison cupped Eliza's face in his hands and kissed her with all the tenderness and promise he could pour into that single moment. They had built a house, just as Harrison had planned, halfway between Carlin and the Crawford Ranch. It was a good-sized cabin with 2 main rooms and a loft, with space for a family to grow. Harrison had spent the early spring cutting timber and laying the foundation, and Marcus and several men from town had helped raise the walls and roof. Eliza had sewn curtains and chosen furniture from the general store, and by the time they married, the house was ready to become a home. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, 2 people learning each other in the most intimate way, and afterward, lying in their bed with Eliza's head on his chest, Harrison sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the day he had heard her scream, for the courage to go out on that ice, for the chance to love this remarkable woman. "What are you thinking?" Eliza asked softly, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life would be if I hadn't been hunting near the lake that day. You would have gone on living alone in your cabin, trapping and hunting and being perfectly content. I thought I was content, but I was wrong. I was just existing. You taught me the difference between existing and truly living." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her dark hair falling around her face. "You saved my life that day on the lake, but you saved me in other ways too. You made me believe that there could be someone who saw all of me and loved me anyway. That's a precious gift, Harrison." He pulled her down for another kiss, and they spent the rest of the night learning and loving, building the foundation of their marriage with every touch and whispered word. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eliza continued teaching at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, and Harrison worked as a guide and hunter, bringing in money that kept them comfortable. They tended a small garden in the summer, raised chickens for eggs, and on Sundays they rode to the Crawford Ranch for family dinners that were filled with laughter and warmth. That first summer of their marriage was golden. They took long rides through the mountains, Harrison showing Eliza the places he had discovered in his years of solitude. They swam in clear mountain streams, had picnics in meadows full of wildflowers, and made love under the stars with only the night sky as witness. They talked endlessly about their childhoods, about their dreams, about the life they wanted to build together. In the evenings, after supper was finished and the dishes were washed, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, Eliza's hand in Harrison's, content to simply be together. "I want children," Eliza said one evening as they watched the sky turn orange and pink. "Not right away necessarily, but someday. I want to raise a family with you." "I want that too," Harrison agreed, pulling her closer. "Little ones running around, filling this house with noise and chaos and love." "What if I'm not a good mother?" Eliza asked, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through. "What if I'm too stubborn, too independent?" "Then our children will be stubborn and independent too, and that's not a bad thing," You'll be an amazing mother, Eliza. You're patient and kind, and you love teaching. Those are all the qualities a good mother needs." She kissed him then, soft and sweet. "Thank you for always believing in me." "Always," he promised. Winter came again, and with it the memory of how they had met. On a cold December morning, exactly 1 year after Harrison had pulled Eliza from the frozen lake, they walked down to Lake Lamoille together. The ice was forming again, treacherous and beautiful, and they stood on the shore holding hands. "I still have nightmares about it sometimes," Eliza admitted. "About being under the ice, not being able to breathe, not knowing which way was up. I have them too. Dreams where I don't reach you in time, where the ice breaks and I lose you forever." Harrison pulled her into his arms. "But then I wake up and you're there beside me, warm and alive, and I remember that we made it. We survived. We did more than survive. We found each other." She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. "Promise me something, Harrison. Promise me that we'll never take this for granted, this life we've built together. Promise me we'll remember how precious it is." "I promise. Every single day I'll remember how lucky I am to have you." They stood there on the shore of the frozen lake, two people who had been brought together by terror and ice and screams in the cold air, who had turned that moment of near death into a lifetime of love. Spring brought news that changed everything. Eliza had been feeling unwell for weeks, tired and nauseous, and when Mrs. Crawford came to visit and saw her daughter's condition, she smiled knowingly. "You're pregnant, dear," she said matter-of-factly. "I had the same symptoms with both you and your brother." Eliza and Harrison stared at each other in shock, then joy spread across both their faces. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Harrison picked Eliza up and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness, and Eliza clung to him with tears streaming down her face. "We're having a baby," she kept saying, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Harrison, we're going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Eliza suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and by the time summer arrived, she was uncomfortable and swollen and thoroughly tired of being pregnant. But through it all, Harrison was there, bringing her cool water when she was nauseous, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, reading to her when she was too tired to do anything but rest. "You're going to be such a good father," Eliza said one evening as they sat together on the porch, her hand on her swollen belly. "You're patient and kind, and you actually listen. Our child is lucky to have you." "Our child is lucky to have both of us," Harrison corrected. "And I'm the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife and the mother of my children." Their son was born on a crisp October morning in 1887, with Mrs. Crawford and the midwife from Carlin in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and Harrison spent most of it pacing in the main room, jumping every time Eliza cried out, feeling helpless and terrified. But when Mrs. Crawford finally emerged with a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, her face was glowing. "You have a son," she said, placing the baby in Harrison's arms. "A healthy, beautiful boy, and Eliza is tired but well." Harrison looked down at the tiny face of his son, at the small features and the shock of dark hair, and felt his heart expand in his chest. This was his child, his and Eliza's, a perfect combination of both of them. He was overwhelmed with love so powerful it took his breath away. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Of course. She's asking for you." Eliza was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but radiantly beautiful. When Harrison entered with their son, her face lit up with such joy that he felt tears prick his eyes. "Look what we made," she whispered as he placed the baby in her arms. "Isn't he perfect? He's incredible." "You're incredible. I love you so much, Eliza." They named him Henry Marcus Tucker, after Harrison's father and Eliza's. The baby had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the very beginning he was loved beyond measure. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of his existence. Eliza took a year off from teaching to care for Henry, but she was eager to return to the schoolhouse. They found a solution in Mrs. Delaney, a widow from Carlin who was happy to care for the baby during the days Eliza taught. It was a good arrangement that allowed Eliza to continue the work she loved while also being a devoted mother. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Henry grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a curious and intelligent little boy who loved books as much as his mother and the outdoors as much as his father. When he was 3, Eliza became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1890, a tiny girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's fierce spirit. They named her Grace Elizabeth Tucker, and Henry was immediately smitten with his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. Life was full and rich and chaotic in the best possible way. Harrison expanded his guide business, and Eliza became the head teacher at the Carlin schoolhouse when the previous teacher retired. They added rooms to their house as the children grew, turning it from a simple cabin into a real home filled with laughter and love. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the house was peaceful, Harrison and Eliza would sit on their porch and talk about everything they had built together. They talked about Henry's progress in school, about Grace's mischievous nature, about the new students in Eliza's classes, about the hunting trips Harrison was planning for the fall. "You remember the day we met?" Eliza asked one evening, 10 years after Harrison had pulled her from the frozen lake. "Do you remember how scared we both were? I remember thinking I couldn't let you die. I remember feeling like if I didn't reach you in time, something vital and important would be lost from the world." Harrison took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally after so many years together. "I was right. You are vital and important, Eliza, not just to me but to everyone whose life you touch. You saved me that day, but you've saved me every day since. You made me believe in love, in partnership, in building a life with someone who sees all of you and loves you anyway." "We saved each other," Harrison said. "That's what love does. It saves us from loneliness, from isolation, from living half a life. You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together on a frozen lake so many years ago. The children grew. Henry became tall and serious like his father, with a love of books and learning that made his mother proud. He talked about becoming a lawyer, about fighting for justice in the changing West. Grace was wild and free-spirited, equally at home in a dress at church, or riding her horse through the mountains in pants that scandalized some of the more traditional women in Carlin. Eliza encouraged her daughter's independence, recognizing in Grace the same fierce spirit that had sustained her under the ice all those years ago. When Henry was 15 and Grace was 12, Eliza became pregnant one last time, a surprise that left both her and Harrison laughing and shaking their heads. They were both in their late 30s now, older parents by frontier standards, but the baby was welcome and wanted. Their second son was born in the winter of 1897, another healthy boy they named James William Tucker. "Our caboose baby," Eliza said, holding the infant while Henry and Grace looked on with wonder. "Our last little one." "Are you sure about that?" Harrison teased, and Eliza threw a pillow at him. "Very sure. 3 children is plenty. But even as she said it, she was smiling, content with the family they had built, with the life they had created together through love and determination and the willingness to take risks. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and memories. Henry graduated from school and went east to study law, sending letters home filled with stories about city life and his studies. Grace, now a beautiful young woman of 17, had attracted the attention of several young men in Carlin, but she remained unimpressed with all of them, claiming none could match the standard her father had set. "You've ruined me for ordinary men," she told Harrison with a laugh. "You treat Mother like she's the most precious thing in the world, and you've shown me what a real partnership looks like. How am I supposed to settle for less?" "You're not," Harrison said firmly. "Never settle, Grace. Wait for someone who sees you and values you for exactly who you are." James, the youngest, was growing up wild and free, a boy who loved the mountains and animals and wide open spaces. He followed Harrison everywhere, learning to track and hunt and survive in the wilderness, soaking up his father's knowledge like a sponge. In the spring of 1902, 15 years after they were married, Harrison took Eliza back to Lake Lamoille. It was April, and the ice had melted weeks ago, leaving the water clear and blue in the spring sunshine. They stood on the shore where Harrison had pulled Eliza to safety all those years ago, their hands clasped together. "It seems like a lifetime ago," Eliza said softly. "That girl who fell through the ice, she was so young and so scared. She was also brave and stubborn and determined to survive. Those qualities are what drew me to you, Eliza. They still do. We've built a good life, haven't we? A family, a home, a place in this community. We've made a difference. We have. But the best part isn't the house or the children or any of that, as wonderful as it all is. The best part is waking up next to you every morning and knowing I get to spend another day loving you." Eliza turned to face him fully, her green eyes, still as vibrant as they had been at 23, shining with emotion. "I love you, Harrison Tucker. I've loved you since you came out of that guest room and bossed me around, and I'll love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Eliza Crawford Tucker. Thank you for screaming loud enough for me to hear you. Thank you for fighting to stay alive. Thank you for choosing me and building this life with me." They kissed there on the shore of the lake where their story began, two people whose love had been forged in ice and terror, and had grown into something strong and lasting and beautiful. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Droughts came and tested the ranchers, including Marcus and Mrs. Crawford, whose ranch Harrison and Eliza helped save with loans and hard work. Economic panic swept through the country, affecting even remote Nevada. But through it all, Harrison and Eliza faced each challenge as they had faced everything else in their lives, together and with determination. Henry,